gives me great pleasure to again welcome Prof Madhusudhan Rao sir. He's the head of Department of Design at IIT Delhi. Many of you would know him for his work on design and development of various devices, medical products, assistive devices, especially smart cane, which is famous all over the world. In fact, for me, smart cane is a product which I really looked up to while designing the Arise standing wheelchair. He's co-founded the Assist Tech Lab, which is focused on developing different devices for people with visual impairment. And he sits on the boards of various companies. He's very passionate about user-centric design, inclusive design, and responsible for driving multiple programs in design, innovation, and entrepreneurship. I was personally looking forward to this session for a lot of the startups for a while now. While interacting with many startups, often we see that they are running towards a solution without deeply understanding the problem. The problem is either not well defined or not backed with much data. Even during my initial days, I had done the similar mistake, and I had learned a great deal from Professor Rao on this subject. Personally, he's a mentor to me and has been of immense support. This is the fourth time I am participating in this session, and I still feel there is so much to learn from this. I'm sure all of you would really benefit from this session. Once again, thank you so much, Rao sir. And with this, over to you, sir.
Okay. Good evening, and thanks, Vivek, for that generous introduction. I hope I am audible.
Very clear, sir.
So let me also share my slides. Yeah. So, okay. So IIT Madras Incubation Cell. So thanks for this opportunity. And of course, I'm here more to exchange our ideas and experiences, not as a lecture, not for the lecture. We'll try to make it, let's see, as interactive as possible. And initially, I wanted to spend more time on Q&A and very little, but I still prepared a few slides to trigger the discussion, taking a small example. And probably that will provoke us to interact and ask more questions and participate. Okay, so the topic which is given is design thinking essential for new product development? Now, the word design thinking, I'm sure I don't have to introduce to this community. It's one of the most talked about phrases in today's time, particularly more from the innovation entrepreneurship perspective, and for that matter, any problem-solving perspective. Design thinking, some people consider it as a philosophy. Some people consider it as a methodology. Some people consider it as a set of tools which can be used. Maybe it's all of them, depending on how you want to use it for your own purpose. And there are also strong criticisms for design thinking, which are also valid. So probably we'll try to conclude that towards the end. And I have also chosen that let's also discuss this in the context of new product development that may be of interest to people who have gathered here. And what I'll do is probably as I go along, maybe I'll pause on a few occasions for a question answers or interactions, and then I'll continue so that it doesn't become a monotonous for you. Okay, so best way to, in fact, learn design thinking is not to lecture, not to listen, not to discuss, but more do it yourself. So I think the best way which we found design thinking can be learned is by DIY. We'll try to bring a little glimpse of that as a part of this lecture too. Okay, so in order to get started, maybe let me start with a small problem, and then we can do that. So one of the very common problems which the entire world faces, which is still not solved, is fall of elderly. Okay, So all over the world, people who are senior citizens, who are elderly, have different type of falls. And one important aspect about the fall is that it's common among poor countries and rich countries, global south, global north, developed or developing countries. I think population in almost every country faces the fall. And whenever the fall happens, the consequences are very, very serious. And this is actually WHO study, which has been done over a period of time, that the frequency of falls is very high. If you look at above 65, it's almost 1/3 of the people who fall every year. It may be a very small fall to a very a serious fall. And people who actually fall, a significant percentage are admitted in hospitals and also succumb to very serious injuries, particularly hip fractures and brain injuries. And some people end up being bedridden for the rest of the life. And the people who are bedridden and hospitalized, it is also seen that many of them actually die within a year of their admission. So it's a very, very serious problem. I was just talking to some of the researchers in Russia some time back before the war, and they were saying that this is still a completely unsolved problem in their country too, and it's true with India too. Now, if I want to address such a problem, let's say we're looking more from the new product development point of view. Whenever we develop a new product, we build a product for some problem solving or for some need which has to be addressed, etc. So if I ask you, if this is my problem statement, how to reduce fall risks in elderly, what would be your solution? Maybe if you have a solution, can you actually put it in a chat window? Maybe I can go through some of them and build upon that. So one of the solutions which has come is person to care always. I can interpret that. Maybe I'll discuss about that. Anything else? Or if you don't want to answer, also you can mention why you don't want to provide a solution. Understand how the bone degeneration happens. Wonderful. By studying their walking pattern. Wonderful. Support instrument. Another solution. Somebody says, I think we should find root cause of the problem. Very good. Extremely delighted. Anything else? You can put your comments also, if not solution. Remove hazards. Wonderful. Proactive eye care and strength training for improved bone density. Wonderful. Robo for elderly. Very technical solution. Develop a assisting robo. Yeah, I think robo has come multiple times. Monitoring their health conditions regularly. Very important aspect. Fall prediction through AIML. Fall prediction and then prevention, I assume, which is there. Then develop a automated wheelchair for elder. Okay, this is another. So I see some about a dozen comments, a dozen solutions, which is interesting. So if you actually look at the kind of solutions which have come up, they vary anywhere from a new product development like a robo to something like provide a caregiver, which was the first solution. It says person to care always. That means you want to put another person to take care of elderly is also a solution. So interesting solutions, and this is what generally happens even when we do it in a classroom. Okay, even when there is a discussion in the classroom, usually people come up with a very interesting and solution such as this, which is always heartening to discuss. But design thinking actually says that, hey, wait, before you come up with a solution, maybe you have to do something more, is the first lesson which we actually take from this thing. So what design thinking, I'll try to put design thinking as some of a few points, because it's very difficult to cover all aspects, but some very important aspect. So let me start with the first point. First point says, before you actually come up with a solution, it is always important and necessary to do some research on the problem itself and postpone the identifying a solution to a later part of the problem solving. In other words, investing time, energy, efforts, money on researching and understanding the problem is a very crucial and also a very strong foundation of any design thinking process. So it says, don't even think about a solution till you have enough, let's say, idea or information or a knowledge about the problem itself. So that's the first thing. Now, if I look at a problem such as this, there can be a lot of questions which can be asked. Like, for example, very basic question which some of you also mentioned is, what are the reasons of fall? Okay, like what are the reasons because of which elderly fall? Itself could be a question. And in order to answer this itself requires sometimes many days, weeks, or even months of a research to know all the causes which because of which elderly fall. Now, if I actually look at the already done research and borrow from there and show you, the falls happen because of variety of reasons. There are dozens of reasons which can happen. One type of factors are related to biological risk factors, such as you age, your physical cognitive capacities go down, and or somebody may be having a specific illness like Parkinson or arthritis could be another reason. There are also a lot of environmental risk factors. For example, either slippery floors or, let's say, insufficient lighting, which somebody actually mentioned in the solution also, that there should be well illuminated pathways, etc. There are also reasons could be completely a behavioral risk factor. For example, somebody is walking after consuming an alcohol, or they are not wearing an appropriate footwear, can all be the reasons which can also cause fall. Or they can also be a socio-economic risk factor. Socio-economic risk factors may not be sometimes directly related to the fall, but what happens after the fall occurs. How well a person is taken care after the fall happens. For example, somebody may have a low income or education levels, so you may not go to hospital, or you have inadequate housing which causes you to go through a fall. So there could be a multiple reasons. Now, this is just one question which we asked. What are the reasons of fall? And then we see that there is enough research which has been done, which is available. And I would like to probably go through all of this. Now, if I can actually look at some of your solutions, already assume that falls happen because of one specific factor. When somebody said there should be a good illumination, that means you are only addressing one factor, one of the dozens of factors because of which fall occurs. And that's already an assumption which somebody is making when proposing a solution. When I know all the reasons, probably it may be possible to come up with maybe a much better solution, a solution which works for more than one factors, maybe for all factors. And if I'm able to address more and more factors in my solution, probably I'm expanding my market. I'm expanding my beneficiary base. I'm also expanding my impact. So there could be a multiple ways of looking at this. And hence, the very first foundation of design thinking is that let's research on the problem. Now, I just showed one question that what are the reasons of fall, and we ended up with a lot of information. One can go on asking multiple questions, which can be at 10, 20, or it can even go into hundreds, depending on how much research you would like to do it on the problem. For example, I would like to know what are the circumstances when most of the falls occur, or what are the surfaces where fall occurs are more frequent, what time of the day when most falls occur. All these data will probably give me enough inputs to plan my solution better. And that is the reason why I would like to postpone my solution for the time being. And I don't want to think about the solution. Or any health conditions which trigger such falls, which was also shown. And this is also important. When we say avoiding the or fall risk, addressing the fall risk, it's not only just the prevention of a fall, it's also that how do you reduce the injuries due to fall, or how do we provide a medication after the fall is also included when you say risks due to a fall. For example, I would like to know what do people do to avoid fall risk. Somebody can say I use a cane, or there may be already in existing solutions. One would like to study that. Suppose if fall happens, who helps them? Some of the elderly may be staying alone. Some of them may be staying with another elderly person who is a companion. Then you need a help when the fall occurs. And who helps them? Some data and insights would help me to find a solution. Now, how do they communicate to others about the fall? If somebody is living alone and there is a fall, now how do I communicate to, let's say, somebody outside to tell that I have fallen is also an issue. Then if you want to have an automatic detection of a fall, which some of you already mentioned in your solution, you would like to look at that. And how much time does it typically take before the help reaches, before the person is actually, let's say, taken to a hospital in some of the cases, etc. So I can go on with more and more questions. The more I study these questions, the more I have a data, the more I have this information and knowledge, there is a very high probability that I'll come up with a better solution than without this reason. Okay. Many elderly people use a cane. So what is the role of cane in preventing the fall? Do most of the people who live alone, or what kind of probably financial and socio-economic conditions of the people who fall? This is also important. The people who actually fall do themselves consider it as a fall. Some people are extremely afraid of falls. Some people probably do not care. So what are those percentages would be an interesting. How is the problem being addressed currently? Because the problem which we are discussing has not come just today. It has been there for ages. So what has been happening? What were the solutions which are already suggested, and what are those solutions? And some of these solutions may have actually made it to a market. I would also like to get an idea what products and solutions are available for elderly to buy and use these solutions. And if the problem is not solved after all these years, there may be a reason why the existing solutions are not working and the problem still prevails. Even today, like in 2022, it's still a big unresolved problem. So that means there is still a huge scope for finding a solution or an improving a solution, etc. And sometimes solutions may exist in the market, maybe that people are not aware about the solution. It may be an awareness problem. So there could be many such questions which can be asked. What I showed is a few typical questions for this particular problem which you would like to ask. And imagine that you have all the data information about all these problems, and then you sit for a solution. Many of you may agree that probably you come up with a solution. So what I would like to probably do is go back to a chat window, and I want to hear from you, some of you who have suggested a solution. Would you have a different solution than the previous one in view of this discussion? If so, maybe you can just type it in the chat window. Anybody would like to probably, I think if there is an audio, people can also switch on the audio and speak. That's also fine. We had about 12 to 15 solutions. Any of you would like to probably rethink at the solution which you have proposed, or would you still go with the same solution? Anyone? Okay, Praveen says, yes, the approach would be much more comprehensive. If I gather correctly, you are saying if you do a research, your approach to solution would be a more comprehensive. Is that correct?
Right.
I think so.
Right. Yeah, the focus would be on the impact, the ground you are covering, rather than just pointed solution.
Okay. Somebody, Bonnie is saying, yes, I would like to rethink about the solution. Then Sampath is saying, definitely more technology oriented, such as robo IoT. Anybody would like to come up, basically speak? Or any of the questions which you have, maybe that's also. I would now try to target my solution to a particular section of all, example, people with some disease, some age group, okay? So that means somebody is trying to change that. So that is Shravya.
Professor, for each of these,
Yeah, go ahead.
if it is specifically due to elderly who's alone, the solution is little different. So depends on the problem. What is the root cause for falling? Then the solution will differ for each of them. Maybe initially I indicated a common solution, but we need to look at exactly what is the problem, and then we need to come up with a specific solution. Is what I can understand from this.
Wonderful. So in other words, if I understand correctly, what you are saying is, if you do enough research, probably you will be able to define your problem or a need statement more precisely. Correct? Because this reducing the fall risks among elderly can take multiple directions of solutions. And it can be actually posed as multiple sub-problems. Maybe you'd like to target a particular community or a very specific factor because of which happens. And you would also like to look at the data, which is more prevalent and which is less prevalent, so that you also have an idea about what is the kind of people whom you are trying to reach out and what is the market size.
Yes, Professor.
Thank you. So let me see, there is one more. Faya says specific solutions for specific reasons of all should be explored. Now that is true, but one thing is, as an entrepreneur, you don't want to try too many solutions at a time. You would also like to prioritize and would like to see what is probably the one first thing which you would like to attempt before you try for different solutions for different. So I think this basically the message which is here is doing a research before going for a solution always is an advantage, and there are many takeaways from that. In fact, what happens is, as we go along, you will also see that it helps you in almost every stage of your new product development when you actually do this. Right now, we just had a glimpse of, let me continue. So now question comes ki, if I have to do a research before, let's say I find a solution. Now, what type of research should be done, and what kind of research is possible? So usually when it comes to new product development or for design thinking, we often try to classify as a primary or a secondary research, which is there. So usually we say it's a primary or a secondary research. And let me start with first secondary research, which many of us are actually familiar. What we do is, for understanding the problem, we look for maybe internet research papers, reports, existing patents on the same problem or solutions, and what are the products which are available in the market. And so this type of a research is very common among any new product developer when you take up, let's say, more an innovation or an entrepreneurial pursuit. And this is also very common among engineering graduates because we are also trained to do our research or a literature review, which is primarily a secondary research. But what is more valuable and sometimes absolutely essential is to do some primary research. So secondary research basically pertains to looking at research done by someone else and being benefited by that. But the primary research says, why can't I gather the data or information or a knowledge?
Rao sir, sorry, I think someone is muted.
They muted all. So Professor Rao also muted.
It is still muted, sir.
Yeah, now it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
So where did I lose? I don't know.
Only in the primary research.
Okay, so I think engineers are generally, engineering graduates are very good at secondary research, but sometimes they ignore completely the primary research. Sometimes designers do good primary research and they are less rigorous in secondary research. So I think it would be a good to have a good combination and being benefited by both. So a primary research basically means that I would spend enough time observing or being in that environment where the problem lies, observing the elderly, maybe getting an insight or a first-hand insight of how the fall occurs. maybe visiting, let's say, an elderly home where there are many people. And there could be a multiple ways of doing it. Or it could be a shadowing. Shadowing means being with one elderly or a few elderly person for a very long duration. In some cases, you can also keep yourselves in the shoes of an end user who is facing the problem, which may not be very appropriate in this case, but it may be true in many other new product development cases, where I would like to put myself in the shoes of a end user and feel the same problem, which we all often call as a role play. And you would like to also interview people. When I say interview, it need not be end users only. It can cover all stakeholders. For example, in this case, elderly people may be the users, but their families, the maybe people who take care of them, like caregivers, they all become our stakeholders when we interview and try to get as much information and wealth of data which is possible. One can also do a lot of consultation with experts, such as talking to physicians who are experts or who specialize in geriatric care, and they would have treated number of elderly people over a period of time for falls, etc. So primary research basically says that gather or feel or see the problem yourself and information, rather than seeing from other sides, which is like a secondary research. And since we live in IoT world and there is a lot of data which is being generated, there is also now it's very prevalent to use any type of data which is available for us to do. For example, I would also say if I have an opportunity to, let's say, look at, let's say, a CCTV data of an elderly home for last 3 years, that can actually give me a valuable information. Okay, this may not be reported as a secondary research. This is not something I am going to observe, but I can get this data or where the people generally, where the CCTV data is available. These also become. So I would like to use as many sources as possible, understand the problem from all aspects. So far, we have not talked about a solution. We are still in the domain of looking at understanding the problem in all aspects, the context, the environment, the people, everything related to the problem. Now, what happens is key. There are also design thinking not only tells what should be the process, but it also introduces a lot of tools. Some of these tools can be easily learned. There is enough information which is available in the net. For example, many of you may have used empathy maps to understand the users or sometimes the stakeholders. So when you immerse, when you observe, when you interview people, you are also capturing what the person says and what the person thinks, what the person does, because I am observing what the person feel, and all the insights which come related to the problem becomes, each of them is my data set. And this data, I would like to also use it to not only define my problem precisely, but also to find the right solution. Because if I have done enough of immersion and observation, I know elderly people very well, having spent enough time. Just to give an example, we just completed a project from a major public hospital, which said, can you improve the patient experience in our hospitals? Okay. And what we did is we actually put 3 people for many weeks to spend in the hospital, just observe talk to people, capture as much of, I don't know, video or data, including CCTV data. And it gave us enough information to know what are the kind of problems which people face. And that gave us to identify out of the 100 pain points which patient goes through, what are the 2, 3, 4 priority ones which I should be addressing, which can have probably maximum impact if they are addressed. There can be many things which are problem. For example, one of the patients and said, there is no clear access to the drinking water. Okay. So that's also a pain point, but there may be a more serious pain points. Like somebody said, I'm an elderly person standing for 3 hours and there is no seating. Okay. So it could be multiple aspects of a problem which one can get from such a data set. And then you can prioritize and see what is that you would like to address instead of looking at all aspects of a problem, which is difficult for an entrepreneur to do it. So empathy mapping gives enough insights. If a problem comes from multiple stakeholders, multiple users in a very strong manner, you know that that's a more serious insight than just one person saying very not very seriously about a certain aspect of a problem or something. So you can also make patterns, you can make clusters. From these clusters, you can get information. And all these things are generally taught as a part of an empathy mapping process. And I think it would be wonderful if every entrepreneur or a new product developer or innovator knows a little bit about empathy mapping, either themselves or at least one of the team members. Now, all this data which comes through primary, secondary research and tools such as empathy mapping helps you to define a problem. Now, take the same example. What we started as a problem is, how do you reduce the fall risks among elderly? This was a much broader problem. Now, when I do enough research, probably I would like to go to a more specific problem statement. Should I be concentrating for a solutions which help in preventing the falls? Okay. So preventing the falls is one aspect of a broader problem, which is reducing the fall risks. Or you can say that preventing a fall is probably a most difficult thing. Should I actually come up and say, I can reduce the probability of a fall? Okay. I would like to come up with a product. If you're using this product or a solution, instead of the chances of your fall reduces, let's say 1 in 10. Even that's a solution. You are not preventing it, but you are actually reducing the probability of a fall. Somebody can say, falls cannot be prevented, I don't want to work. Can I actually work on reducing the injuries which happen due to fall? For example, one of the major consequences of fall is a hip fracture. And can I do something to prevent hip fracture when fall occurs? Is also a very specific problem under the umbrella of reducing fall risk. I think it was also mentioned in one of those notes that, or later, that somebody would like to just work on how to detect the falls. Maybe just someone else will figure out after the fall is detected, how to take care of the person or what kind of treatments are possible. But as an entrepreneur, I see a big opportunity in just detecting a fall. And all that I would like to do is to bring a device, product, or a solution just to detect the falls. Then your problem becomes more precise. And you also know that this is a strong problem because your primary and secondary research has shown that this is something which everybody would like to have it or would want to address. Other thing which such a research also helps you to scope your problem. Now, scoping is very important, as some of you mentioned that you don't want to consider all possible factors and all possible reasons of a fall. So I can say what is included in my problem statement and what are the factors which are excluded in my problem statement. I can clearly come up with such a broad specification of the problem. Say, we have looked at fall can happen because of the dozens of reasons. I say I'm only considering 3 of these important factors, and I'm not going to address any other factors other than those 3. Or you can say that I'm only concentrating on a certain target group. I can say that maybe the kind of product solution which I'm going to come up is more suitable for middle class. Elderly already are rich enough to buy more expensive solutions. Then there are people who probably cannot afford my solutions. So I'm probably targeting a specific economic class or a specific social class or a specific gender. It could be anything which could be your target group. And falls can happen in multiple situations while walking, when somebody can fall from a bed, or when coming down or climbing the stairs. Whether I want to include those or I want to exclude those, because if you are coming up with a solution which can work while walking, fall during a walk may not be the same thing which will work when somebody falls from a bed during a sleep, or getting up or getting down from a bed, which is a very different problem. And whether I should look at both indoor or outdoor. I've just given a few sample inclusion exclusion criteria. It can be much broader, and it will also help me to define the problem more clearly and scope it so that I'm very clear about, when I sit for solution, what is the problem which I'm trying to address. When I start with a problem like reducing fall risks in elderly, I'm thoroughly confused because the solution can take multiple directions. I'm not very clear about what am I trying to do that. Okay, let's say all these things leads to a more specific problem, how to prevent falls among elderly. Okay, let me pause here and just take a couple of questions, and then probably I'll again come back. Any questions at this stage? Or since it's going to be more of an interactive.
Good evening, sir. I have one question, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, can we use 3D printing technology to describe our product?
I think your voice is low. Can you be slightly louder? I just heard 3D printing.
Ramesh, you have a lot of background noise. Can you just mute yourself and type your question in the chat box? If
That's also okay? Fine. That's also fine. In the meantime, I can take someone else's question. You can type your question. That's all. So since we are doing an interactive session, you may or may not agree with everything which I say. So if you think that there is some disagreement, we should discuss that also. Okay, the question which Ramesh is asking, can we use 3D printing technology to describe our products? So the idea is that this is something which comes little later, because we haven't still discussed about the solution. What is the solution which we are going to come up? Once we have a solution, or at least a direction of a solution, then it will be clear whether 3D printing is even more suitable or not. Because 3D printing cannot be, it's after all a prototyping tool. It cannot be a solution to every problem. It may help me to prototype my first solution or something in that direction. So at this stage, it would be very difficult to say whether I should be using 3D printing or not. If it is 3D printing, the same question can be asked for many other things. Should I be using injection molding or a laser cutting, or let's say a water jet cutting? Okay, for doing primary research, how many people do we have to talk in order to generalize the reason? Unfortunately, there is no algorithm. Okay, but there are certain important points in that direction. If you are actually spending more time, you are also losing a lot of time in research, but it generally pays back in terms of less iterations which you do when you sit for a solution. As we know, product development process is an iterative process. You go through a certain failures before you come up with that ideal product or a solution. Your iterations considerably reduce if I spend more and more time understanding the problem. And that's one aspect. Second aspect is, if I scope my problem, let's say I want to include, let's say, falls which are happening both indoor, outdoor, in all circumstances due to all factors, then you need to spend more time, because your problem domain is also pretty large, and you have to cover all types of situations for your research also before you come up with a solution. But if a problem is more clearly defined, then the time it takes would be less. But it's clearly it's very, very difficult. It's like saying, if I am actually coming up with, let's say, a new automobile, how many people should I go to do a market survey? Okay. Now, what you are coming up with may be a very small variant of the existing product. Probably you may end up doing a small number of surveys. But if I'm coming up with a product which is very revolutionary, I know that I need a better validation. I'll probably go and talk to more and more people before I come up with a solution. Okay, anything else? Any other question?
Yes. Hello, sir.
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. Can I ask the question?
Yes, yes.
Hello. Yeah. So after doing the research, sometimes it's very it feels that we need to incorporate a lot of things in the product. It's very difficult to dial it down to a couple of things. So we might end up thinking, okay, our product should do n number of things instead of dialing it down to a specific area, like how you have mentioned, like we can do inclusion, exclusion to define the problem. So how do we deal with such questions? How do we get clarity?
What you are saying is that when you do a research, you may end up with multiple features which your product should have. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you are end up. So what happens is it can happen both ways. It can happen that you would like to have more and more features in your product, but on the other hand, you may even reduce from whatever features which you have already planned. Now, why it happens is, when I go and talk to people, there may be a certain features which probably nobody wants it, but initially I planned about it. I can actually take out that particular feature and say, probably this feature is not required. So it can happen both ways. But you know what happens? If you miss a very important feature, which is desired by users and stakeholders, when you actually go with your product, that feature may actually let you down because you haven't captured something very, very important which users wanted. So your research actually helps to see that you don't miss out on something which are absolutely desirable by the people. Okay. So usually we say, when you have a features, we say must-haves. Must-haves are those which should be there in the product. But then there may be many optional. So which are must-haves, which are the optional, will also come through your research.
So one more question, adding on to the previous one. So when we ask different people during this survey, so there are sometimes where everyone tells their own story and then they have different opinions on the same problem. So this might lead to confusion. So like, how should we proceed once that happens?
That confusion is very clear, correct? Whether you wanted this confusion before you found a solution or after you built a product is a very clear, correct? If you are addressing such a confusion very early, even before your solution, you have a very clarity about this thing. Okay. Now it's so generally what happens is key when you do a research, there are certain things which come out very strongly. There are certain aspects which probably comes out very weakly, which you can ignore. Then there are certain aspects which are in the gray area. So those are items, either you would like to do a little more research to get a clarity, or you'll take a little calculated risk on only those aspects which are little gray areas. Those which are certain you are incorporating, those which are certainly not required you are eliminating. So your effort still reduces, which is there. Imagine the same confusion comes or you have chosen randomly, or you used your own imagination to understand the user requirements and the context, then the risk is much higher. Then the iterations will also be more. Okay, let me take one more. So would a combination of innovator plus researcher make a good team then? Is that straight way of having a design thinking as a practice? So if you actually look at a research which we are speaking here, it is not again not really a traditional research which we do. So if the traditional research which we do in particularly technology and engineering is to look at going to as depth as possible, where breadth is often ignored. But if you actually look at the research which we are speaking now in the context of design thinking, it is that we are actually trying to cover as broad a spectrum as possible with a somewhat limited depth. So the research which is done to understand the user, customers, may be a very different than the traditional research word which we use. So, but yes, in the sense ki, you are saying innovator plus a researcher, I would say every innovator has to be a good researcher. So I would look at researcher as a subset of innovator. Then Faya says product development and product research should go hand in hand, or should we finish the survey first and start making the product without any further changes? Nobody is saying ki, you have to go and do the changes without. Changes still will happen, but the only thing is maybe those changes may be incremental or less serious changes, kind of it. Or the changes which will not cost you very high in terms of time and money. Okay, let me keep proceeding also just for the interest of time, and I'll again pass. So let's say if I take this as my more specific problem, how to prevent falls among elderly. Again, when I can ask you what are the solutions will come up. One more thing which I noticed when I asked you what is the solution for a problem in the very beginning of this session, many of you came up with one solution. But again, another very important foundation of a design thinking is that why one solution? Maybe when you are exploring, before you finalize your solution, why not explore as many solutions as possible and finalize one rather than just jumping onto one single solution? This is also an important, because we are all trained in our educational system that when a teacher or a professor gives a problem, there is one answer. We are never trained that a problem can have multiplicity of answers, and maybe these answers may be true in various different contexts. So design thinking, one of the very foundation is that explore the solution space as aggressively as possible. And then once you have explored the entire space, select that particular solution which actually is most relevant or more likely to work and more likely to succeed in the present context. But before exploring multiple solutions, don't jump onto one solution. So that's another important aspect of explore multiple solutions is a message. For example, if I take, and how do we explore multiple solutions is, if we are a team, we actually sit and do brainstorming and come up with a few solutions. And brainstorming is also both an art and science. Often we do it very differently. In many of the brainstorming sessions, different people come up with different solutions. They would stick to the solution they have come up. They don't see value in other solutions, and ego comes into a play. Everybody tries to defend their solution, and that is not necessarily a great process. Brainstorming, there are wonderful guidelines. I think there are a number of wonderful videos. How to do a more systematic brainstorming is one. But other than that, design thinking also proposes multiple tools. For example, one of the very commonly used tools some of you may have used, some of you may be already an expert, is called as 635 brain writing method. It's just I would say 635 is just a sample numbers, but that's the most common name by which it is known. What it says that suppose there are 6 people, it's not possible for a team to come up with, let's say, 50 great ideas. What is possible is that each one of them come up with, let's say, 3 best ideas or their 3 best ideas, and you write it down. And then each of the team member picks each of the ideas, and instead of rejecting an idea, would try to improve or probably modify it to make it work. So in other words, you start with somebody has put down a solution, other person would actually pick it and then say, this is an improvement which is possible. Sometimes you may accept a solution also without improvement, but often you can say, how can the solution be made better? And this process of iteration, which goes each of the 3 solutions from each of the team members to various people, and when you modify, you end up with more than 100 solutions. And that becomes a very super set of solution. And sometimes in the process, you also end up what is called as out-of-box thinking. Out-of-box thinking is, again, it happens. Sometimes it can also be a guided process. And a guided process has also led to a lot of out-of-box thinking ideas. Another very interesting tool which people use is that when you pick solution, instead of rejecting, you say either I'll do a substitution or I'll combine 2 solutions to get a third one, or eliminate certain feature of a solution to improve it. You can actually do, or substitute could be a possibility. a very interesting episode I wanted to narrate, which happened only few weeks back. I was actually doing a design thinking small workshop for Adivasi children in Madhya Pradesh. And we were actually using the Scamper as a tool. And one of the girls, I think probably 6 years, I think just started a school a couple of years back. She actually combined some of them and substituted and came up with a very interesting solution. And the solution which she proposed is, when we drink a coffee, why do we have to use a water to clean it? Can't we have electronically self-cleaning cups? Okay. Now, sometimes those are very interesting insights. We may not directly think about a self-cleaning coffee mug, but since she was able to combine self-cleaning curtains and some electronics and substituted and came up with this, and we also appreciated her for this solution. We thought that was very frugal. So it happens in many of the sessions when actually people combine, substitute, and improve, you end up with multiple solutions. And when you are actually coming up with these solutions, you are also not evaluating them, which is better or this thing. The design thinking says, when you ideate, the process of ideation, when you come up with a solution, just come up with however silly a solution may be, or however good, but don't use any judgment. Just come up with a solution, because you want to allow process to combine goodness in a maybe a poorer solution with goodness in another solution, and come up with more frugal ways of doing it. So even a bad solution may have a small goodness built into that, which you would like to exploit. So the design thinking also provides you with these techniques of coming up with multiple solutions. And there is enough literature. If somebody wants to know, there are enough YouTube videos. If somebody wants to learn how to come up with, let's say, large number of solutions which you have. And once you have multiple solutions, and this thing, you would also probably like to visualize, because what happens is, suppose, let's say I have 30, 40 solution. When I look at one solution, I see some plus in that, some minus, and then there is another solution which has some plus minus. Individually, when we think about these solutions, I don't get a clear pictures because there are too many. I would probably like to visualize all of them, classify, and probably put it as a more of a mind map. Like, for example, if I take this problem of preventing falls among elderly, one type of solution is, it could be just educating elderly people about fall prevention, which may have peer-to-peer learning sessions to specific educational sessions to maybe preparing a awareness manual about falls, could be anything. Or solution can take another direction, that can we do modification in the environment to prevent falls? Can I provide handrails or any such devices? Can I have anti-slip mats or tiles? Could be another way of looking at. Another direction could be that somebody mentioned in the very first solution is that you should employ a caregiver to take care of this thing. That means there is somebody who is there always with the person. Now it can be you want to employ a caregiver, or family member acts as a caregiver, or you want to run a caregiver volunteering service, are all possible directions of solutions. Or I think it was also mentioned by, I think one of them is, can I have a wearables which actually help you prevent the falls? For example, one of the products which is already there in the market is the belts which actually prevent the fall. Now, these belts generally detect whenever the fall is going to happen using a data such as accelerometer. And then it immediately takes out an airbag, just like injury prevention, which happens in a vehicle crash. The same principle can be used here. These are all possible ways of probably looking at preventing a fall, or even alerting a fall, or it can be a multiple directions which can take. Or somebody can say falls can be prevented. This was also mentioned by one of the participants, that can we have better medication or a better drugs which will improve the, let's say, physical fitness of a person, and maybe periodic health checkups can reduce or even prevent the falls. So these are all possible solutions. So what mind map actually does is, when I have, let's say, 70-80 solution, I would like to visualize all of them as a map. Now, my research says that the kind of people whom I have interviewed are very reluctant to listen to others and likely to go through manuals, then probably I can eliminate one class of solution and say I'm not going to pursue, because this solution is not going to work based on my research, my judgment, my gut feeling of having interacted with number of elderly people. So the research which you do in the very early stage also helps you later to filter your solutions. So first stage is to come up with as many solutions as possible without filtering them. And then next stage is to converge to a specific or a smaller set of solution by applying filters. Filters can be many things. Some are desirable, but they don't make business sense. Some are wanted by users, but technically not feasible, or sometimes technically feasible, but users have not shown a great choice for such a product or a solution. So it can be a multiple filters which one can bring. For example,
few roles. Arsham.
Yeah. So maybe I have one solution which is very difficult to maintain on a day-to-day basis. So that's also a filter. Or I have a solution, it requires a lot of cognitive effort on the elderly person to carry out. And I know that maybe most of the elderly people do not have the same cognitive strengths which a normal person has. So I'll not go for those products and solution which require a lot of cognitive efforts to be used. So I can bring hundreds of such filters and try to eliminate and see those solutions which go through most of the filters. Luckily, all the filters is probably a right solution, because you have eliminated all the reasons because of which your product is likely to fail by going through a filtering process. So that's a next stage. You come up with multiple solutions and then you filter it to do that. And once you filter it, you don't want to just rely on your own imagination. You would like to validate your 1, 2, 3 or a shortlisted solutions. Again, going back to users, maybe by user interviews or showing them, or if you have a prototype, asking them to try out your solutions, and there can be a multiple ways. So there is a specific solution validation stage in a new product development, which is very essential. Some people would go with only one solution. Some people may even go with 3 solutions. For example, we were doing a project where we had to design a bottle. Now, somebody can say, what is so great about design of a bottle? This is a very specific bottle where bottle has 2 regions where 2 different liquids are stored, and you have to combine these 2 liquids just before using or drinking. Now, when we did this particular project to the company, we gave 3 solutions. We said 3 prototypes. Now, because they would like to do their own validation and say out of those 3, which of that solution is actually going to work. Okay, and other thing which is very important, which design thinking ways is, we use postpone the prototyping to a very last stage of the process when you have to build a functional prototype. But it also encourages you to do a lot of prototyping to be done, which may not be a functional prototyping. It may be a look-alike prototype or work-alike prototypes. You would like to prototype to validate only one factor, may not be the entire functionality of a product. Those are all highly encouraged in a design thinking process. Before you actually go and say, I have a functional prototype, which I would like to do. Often we are all trained to do, I think there was also a question that when should we actually build the prototype and take it to the people? So often people think that this is the last stage of a product development, but prototyping can come very early. I know one of the best design companies in the world, they start prototyping even to identify a problem. Okay, even before you come to a solution. So it can be as early as that stage also is a possibility. But one thing which we all know, both in design thinking and new product development, that version 1 of a product or a solution never makes it to a market or an impact. One has to go through a multiple iterations, and the number of iterations which you do, which is shown here back and forth, reduces considerably if your initial research and the problem definition is defined well, and you have followed the explored the multiple solution and converts to a right solution through a filtering process. So design, build, test, fail, modify is a very necessary and integral part of any design thinking session. Okay, so I would probably leave it there. I'll just summarize and then take a couple of questions. So I just covered only a few aspects of design thinking, which you can call it as a design thinking, you may not call and still use it, you'll still be benefited. One is that there is a merit in investing in understanding the problem. There's a good balance of primary and secondary research often helps. And problem definition or identification of the right need is very foundation and crucial to the success of any new product development. And targeting multiple solutions instead of a single solution has a benefit. And an ideal solution need not always be a physical product. Like as you have seen that somebody said how to address the preventing of a falls is to put a caregiver, hire a person. And sometimes it happens. In India, people, particularly those who can afford, they think that having a one person always with elderly not only prevents the falls, but it also prevents many other risks. So, and if in any other country, that's not a solution because that's a too expensive solution. So we don't have to always look for physical product or a solution. Solution can be a product, service, communication, environment. It can take any shape. And use prototyping as early as far as possible for testing is this thing. Okay, I'll just stop it there and take any questions or clarifications. Are happy to exchange ideas. Okay, how to, there is a question by Ramesh, how to overcome conflict among team members? I think it's not very easy. Usually what we have seen is that whenever you are doing a brainstorming or a discussion, truth can be perceived very easily by all the team members if ego is kept aside. Usually, it's the individual ego which actually prevents us from seeing the real truth, and that's where the conflict comes. So a good brainstorming requires an extremely egoless process. That's a question which was there in the chat box. Okay, any other questions in the chat box or otherwise? Okay, Ajay is asking, can you suggest a good book? There are quite a few good books. In fact, if you can pick a book, any of the books on design thinking, which are there. But more than a book, there are tons of information in terms of manuals, videos, tutorials, MOOC lectures. If you go to any of the Coursera or Ed.6, etc., you will also find a lot of lectures on design thinking. So I don't think there is any dearth of information. Okay, very good question. Engineers are generally equipped with prototyping and development skills. How can they develop primary research skills which are out of their domain? Anthropologists may do it better than an engineer. I think I agree to a large extent with you. So that actually also brings that lot of success in new product development is also attributed to your team. So if you have a team, everybody brings a certain skill set. In case I don't have much of, let's say, interviewing skills, let's say primary research skills, is it possible to bring somebody who can actually provide that as a team member? We have seen this happening in multiple ways, either through as a co-founder or as a mentor, somebody who understands this process very well, who would like to become your mentor, or sometimes through collaborations. So it can happen through multiple routes. And instead of I acquiring the skills, which may take long time, is it possible to have another member who brings that? So completeness of a team is probably a number one factor in success of any new product development. Often when we have now analyzed hundreds of failures of student, faculty, and startup teams, somewhere it goes back to a particular aspect which was not addressed because team either did not know, or they were not trained, or they were not comfortable to do that. And I think it is also a little cultural issue, particularly in the Indian setup. When we visit abroad and look at some of the best universities and their notice boards, I see dozens of small notices put saying ki co-founder wanted. But I have not seen that often in any Indian university notice board. Maybe it will happen, or slowly it started happening, where a person has said ki I'm looking for a co-founder with certain skill set. Yeah, I interrupted, somebody wanted to say.
Yeah, Professor Rao, Vivek has shared some of the questions submitted earlier in the chat box. So in
Yeah.
case you would like to pick some of them. And
Yeah. In fact, there are a lot of questions in the chat window also. I'll do that. In fact, I tried to cover some of those as a part of my lecture, which came earlier. But if there are some still, I can still address them if I've not addressed any. But let me go through the ones which have come here. These are interesting. Okay, best practices of how to involve business teams who have actual goals in the process of building strategic products. Also, what will be best method for involving them in go-to-market activities, etc. We also had a program. Let me tell you, maybe that gives you some ideas. We had a program which is called as Biodesign. Initially, it started with a Stanford University. It was called as a Stanford India Biodesign program between IIT Delhi and All India Institute of Medical Sciences. So this is basically a program on medical technology innovation and entrepreneurship program. One of the things which was decided, this is also a Stanford model, is that when we make a team, the team always consists of 4 members, not 5, not 3. Okay. Now, what are the roles which are given to those 4 members in a medical technology innovation? Is one of them has to be a physician. The second one has to be an engineer. The third one has to be a designer, typically an industrial designer. A fourth person who has some idea about businesses. And I think this model has actually worked very well. Only thing which happens is that maybe one of the team members may leave. In that case, you may have to bother about that. But if these 4 people stay for substantial time, usually we have seen most of the efforts leading to a success in this particular one. So this particular program itself has now rolled out about 60-70 products. We had close to about 150 patents and design registrations, and a lot of startups, a lot of technology transfers have happened. I think we think that the success is because the team was complete from the day one. You have a business guy, you have a design guy, you have a technology and the medicine who is a physician. So that's another model which you can think of. It's not always easy to do, but at least there is a. Okay, how design thinking can reduce product development time? Interesting question. What we see is that if I don't do much of a design thinking, I can still do a new product development. But my first feedback only comes when it actually fails in the market. That's too late. If it is actually not going to succeed, then all the effort which has gone probably cannot come back. If you have had a feedback very early in your process of product development, it can save a considerable time. So that's how the number of iterations which go through before you succeed actually reduces when you do a design thinking. Initially, it may look very expensive. I think somebody also put a question that if you're doing a lot of primary research and secondary research, understanding the user, customer, stakeholders, you are spending more time, but the returns in the long run are really valuable. I want to understand how design thinking is different from other standards holistic. So that's why I don't want to really impose the phrase design thinking. some of the concepts which we have discussed today may be a part of many other new product development strategies. So it's good to basically look at those aspects of design thinking with which you are convinced and probably which you can experiment and derive a value. Good thing about design thinking is I can also apply it in bits and pieces. For example, I may not do much of design thinking, let's say, I may not probably do much of primary, secondary research, but if I still go for multiplicity of solution, I may still derive the value of exploring the solution space better. Okay, let me see. The chat window is also running. Okay, so this is another very, very interesting question, and it has been faced by multiple people. What Arvind is asking. Arvind is saying, whenever you experiment, there are multiple features which you would like to validate. Should you try one by one, or should you try all of them in one go? It depends on a particular situation. I'll give an example. We were actually building a product, and we wanted to test ergonomics, like how good is the grip of patients on this particular product was what we were planning to do. Instead of postponing this to the last stage of prototyping, let's say 3D printing or even injection molding, we made simple styrofoam models and went to users and gave them to grip and see whether it's working or not. So these styrofoam models were made only to test the gripping aspect, not the functional aspect or anything, because none of them are possible with a styrofoam model. Why we did it is that if we don't do that individually, we may probably have to do a lot of iterations with 3D printing or even possibly injection molding to get a better grip. So sometimes if the features are very, very critical to product, you can combine a few of them and test them in one type of a model. Often, if the product is complex, very difficult to get all the features tested in one prototype. It's often seen as a difficult. There are, of course, success stories, but it's a little difficult thing to do. Okay, any other question which I have not answered? Sorry, please go ahead.
I think it was quite a comprehensive session, Professor Rao. I think you've covered so many aspects of design thinking and how it relates to new product development. And yeah, so I think we're also, close to 5:40.
Yeah, I know.
5:45,
I also wanted
yeah.
to check with your time,
Sure.
because you may have. I couldn't find it there.
Yeah, I
But
think
the
if
other
you're
thing is
okay,
we can interact, no problem, which is there, and maybe I'll have an opportunity to visit sometime and interact.
Sure, definitely. We'd like it so much if you can, come down and actually have a visit, and maybe we can have an in-person workshop sometime when you're visiting and all that. We'd love to have something like that planned. So I now request Pragdish will give sum up the session and give a vote of thanks for us.
So that's my email address.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing it, Professor. Yeah. Over to you, Pragdish.
Thank you so much, Sopanika. So Professor Rao, thank you so much. I would like to first extend my thanks to you. It was definitely an insightful as well as engaging session, especially when there were a lot of questions that you initially asked, and then you clarified all the queries by all the students as well as the startups who had raised their queries. It was definitely insightful, and your expertise on product design and manufacturing, it was very evident in your delivery. It was also thought-provoking when you said we can actually come up with the multiple solutions for one problem with the help of mind map using design thinking. In fact, it certainly helps for day-to-day life as well. So once again, thank you so much, Professor PVM Rao, for your time as well as for delivering this session. And I would also like to thank all the participants from varied startups as well as students from many engineering colleges, their faculty, and all others who had allocated your time and attending this session. I hope for all the existing entrepreneurs as well as the entrepreneurs to be who has found this session very useful, and you would be applying the design thinking in your business applications. So, and finally, last but not the least, but I would like to thank you so much for the organizing team to have organized this wonderful session. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity. See you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.